Nanaimo is the second largest city on the west coast of Vancouver Island in British Columbia. The picturesque harbor city is the backdrop for the brutal murder of a homeless man. The horrifying event shocks the peaceful community and will mark the lives of 3 adolescent witnesses. The youths will in turn be frightened, cooperative, and dishonest about what they observed. The 3 young witnesses could prove to be the biggest challenge for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigation. August 4th, 2008. A 13-year-old girl and her mother enter the RCMP detachment in Nanaimo. They have come to report a brutal crime. The young girl says that she witnessed a murder early that morning, and the body was then thrown into the water not far from the port of Nanaimo. Corporal Glenn Forsley is the lead investigator in charge of the case.
I received a phone call from my supervisor, and he had let me know that there was a report of a homicide, and it was odd because the complainant came to the front counter, which is, it doesn't happen all the time.
In order to verify the girl's statements, Constable Sean Phillips is dispatched to the boat to look for evidence. The event supposedly took place on board a boat belonging to the teenager's father. It's moored at the Nanaimo Port Authority Marina, which is called the Boat Basin. Glenn Forsley interviews the girl and her mother. Some new details emerge.
I don't know whether she really wanted to be there. I think it was more of a situation where the mom wanted to get to the bottom of things, because from what I understand is that the daughter did not come home immediately that night. So there were some questions about where were you, what were you doing, who were you with? And then finally, it was during the morning or the early afternoon that the daughter said to the mom, stop harassing me, stop bothering me. This is what actually happened. I was present during a murder, and just lay off.
Forsley also learns that the 13-year-old girl was not alone when the event took place.
There was another girl on board the vessel. I believe she's approximately 14, 15 years old, and also a 16-year-old boy.
Also on board with the 3 teenagers are a 22-year-old man named Stephen Bosch and the alleged victim, an older homeless man whose name is unknown.
So at that point, the mom, there was some sense of being incredulous or not wanting to believe that their daughter was part of anything like that. So it was, the mother made the initial decision to send the father down to the boat. The father checked on the boat, found what he thought was some blood on the boat, and then the ball starts rolling.
Officer Phillips inspects the boat and confirms that there are signs of a struggle and bloodshed on board. Phillips immediately tapes off the area and the boat to prevent contamination of the crime scene.
He had essentially corroborated what the young girl had told the police so far. So we were looking at an incident which had occurred late Sunday evening or early Monday morning. And the circumstances were this young girl and also a friend of hers and also a young man were on this young girl's boat. And they had contact with a person who she described as being homeless. And through circumstances, this person was murdered on the boat, and his body was tossed overboard into the water just near the Nanaimo Boat Basin.
Nanaimo RCMP received a report from kayakers who discovered a dead body floating in the water south of the marina.
It was just located, I'd say, 1 or 2 kilometers south of the Nanaimo Boat Basin. It was floating near a log boom. This was just south of a mill located in the area. A canoeist was in the area when they happened a few days.
The identity of the victim still needs to be formally confirmed by autopsy. Nanaimo is a small community, and the police recognized the victim as Mark Hanley.
Mr. Hanley was described by members of our office who were quite familiar with him, being homeless, as having substance abuse issues, drug addictions. He did frequent the downtown area. But there was another side to Mr. Hanley, that being a person who had a family, who had children, who had people that cared about him and loved him and wanted him to do better in life.
Investigators wait for the autopsy results and the formal identification of the victim. Glenn Forsley turns his attention to the boat at the marina. He looks for evidence that might connect the dead body to the alleged murder described by the 13-year-old girl.
It was a commercial dive boat, an aluminum, I'd say about 30 feet in length. It had an open deck on the back, a small wheelhouse, and inside the wheelhouse there would have been an area like you'd find in like a camper trailer, a stove and a bed, table setting, that kind of thing.
The Nanaimo RCMP Forensic Identification Team has been at work on the boat since it was first reported earlier that day.
What was found on the boat was a substantial amount of blood, blood spray, blood spatter, that type of forensic evidence. We were told that through the girl that first attended the police office that all the rags, cleaning products were thrown either overboard as they were floating along, and there was also a suitcase that was on board, and either the suitcase was filled with these cleaning supplies or the suitcase was simply thrown overboard.
Forsley wants to interview someone who was working at the marina the night of the murder. Security guard Doug Bradford was on duty.
At that point, we spoke with one of the security guards or commissionaires that worked in the area and found out a little bit more about the boat and about the occupants of the boat.
There was a boat tied up illegally in the wrong spot. It shouldn't have been there. But there was nobody on board at the time. So I didn't pay any attention to it. A little while later, I'd say around midnight, two girls came up off the docks. And of course the docks are closed. And I asked them what they were doing down on the docks, and they said that they were off the dive boat. And then I guess it would be another hour, hour and a half, give or take. And they came back and they had two young lads with them. And so immediately I knew where they were heading. They were heading down to the boat that was illegally parked. So I followed them down there. The only thing I saw as I approached the boat was the owner's daughter sitting at the back of the boat saying, "Here comes security." And then I went down and asked them why they were there, and they can't be there. A fella came out and said, "We'll move right away."
The security guard is certain that he didn't see anyone resembling the victim, but he does remember the suspicious behavior of the four teenagers on board.
They looked like they had their hands caught in a cookie jar. If I can't put it a better way than that, you've seen kids with their hands in the cookie jar and they're in trouble. And they were just nervous and agitated. Like as if they'd done something wrong, but I didn't know what it would be, other than they thought they were illegally parked, and they were scared that I might go down and check the boat.
The presence of Bosch and the other youths confirms what the 13-year-old witness reported. Bradford also says that he heard the boat leaving the marina later that evening.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, he felt it was heading out to the water from the pier. As far as seeing it or hearing anything else, that was it.
Corporal Forsley contacts the Nanaimo Port Authority to access footage from their video surveillance system at the marina. Is it possible that the crime has been captured on camera? In August 2008, a 13-year-old girl reports that she witnessed a murder earlier that morning aboard her father's boat at the Nanaimo Marina. RCMP forensic officers examine the boat and find blood and signs of a cleanup in the cabin. Later that day, kayakers report finding a body in the water 2 kilometers from the marina. Attending officers recognize the body as that of a homeless man named Mark Hanley. He is known to Nanaimo police. A security guard at the marina tells police he saw a group of young people on the boat late on the night in question. The marina is equipped with a sophisticated video surveillance system. Lead investigator Glenn Forsley gains access to footage of the crime scene.
We have cameras that cover a broader area, so it covers a little bit of the water. The ramps will certainly be covered. And we have over 30 cameras that are in operation at any one time. If you're walking through our area, there's most likely at some point you're going to be monitored.
In the end, we're provided with, I'd say, at least half a dozen different camera angles.
A police officer is assigned to screen the footage to see if the surveillance system captured the activities described by the security guard. Investigators begin to question the other juveniles that were involved in the crime. Corporal Sorab Rupa interviews a 14-year-old girl. She is a friend of the girl who made the initial report.
I think she was 14 at the time, but a mature 14, somebody who had been around and was aware of the world around her. She wasn't immature in any way. There was a lot of evidence that the elder of the two teenage girls gave that the younger one could not provide. So, essentially, from a witness point of view, the elder girl was, in my opinion, more instrumental in the case. So on that particular day, I met with her twice. Once at the office where I interviewed her, and then the second time, later on the same day, I went down to the seawall in Nanaimo. I wanted some idea of what she was talking about and put some context to it as far as locations, angles, where things were parked, so that in any future discussion with her, I would know what she's talking about and I would have a very clear understanding of what she means.
With the girl's statement, the events of the evening aboard the boat become more clear.
The two girls had walked to a part of Nanaimo called Harewood, where they had met up with another male who was a friend of both of them. Along the way, they heard a male calling out to them, and this was Bosch, and he actually joined them, and they all walked back together. Bosch had some cocaine on him. The two young girls, along with their male friend, and Bosch arrived at the youngest girl's parents' boat. And the elder of the two girls and Bosch consumed the cocaine. Once the cocaine was done, they left the younger girl and her male friend on board the vessel, and they walked up to the underground parking area of the Nanaimo boat basin.
The girl then tells Corporal Rupa about meeting the victim, Mark Hanley, with Stephen Bosch near the parking garage.
Bosch and Hanley had a discussion, and the elder of the two girls who had been doing cocaine with Bosch went to the washroom. She came out of the washroom. She saw Bosch and Hanley walking down the finger of the dock and approaching the boat. So she ran down, and she was quite concerned about this male getting on board the boat. She was also concerned that for her friend, her other young friend, whose parents' boat it was, and she didn't want her to get into any trouble. There was some discussion about this male being allowed on the boat, and eventually Bosch, I guess, managed to win that discussion, and the male was invited onto the boat.
The girl describes how Stephen Bosch and Mark Hanley head straight to the cabin to consume their cocaine. She explains to Rupa that the atmosphere seems different now that the homeless man has joined the group.
Most of the cocaine is now consumed by Bosch. Hanley is sitting there, and he's making a crack pipe with a can. She does a bit of drugs with them, and she leaves, because it looks like to her that things are going to get ugly, and she's a bit concerned about the way Bosch is behaving and the state Hanley is in. So she goes back to the back of the boat where her younger girlfriend, and their male friend are.
Corporal Rupa learns that the three teenagers stood helplessly on the stern and watched.
And at that point, the assault starts on Hanley by Bosch.
The girl says that after the attack, Bosch orders the girls to clean up the mess. They fearfully obey.
She's asked to help dispose of evidence off the side of the boat, and she does that. She did make a statement that when she was cleaning up the blood, she didn't do a very good job, and it was her intention specifically not to do a very good job so that some evidence would be left behind for the police to find. She was quite traumatized by the events, not only of what she witnessed, but also cleaning up a large amount of blood in the boat. And I guess fearing for her own safety and that of her young girlfriend and the other male. And being trapped on a boat, it adds a certain dimension to your own fear.
The girl tells Corporal Rupa that Bosch ordered the 16-year-old boy to drive the boat out of the marina. They travel for some time and then dump the body and the evidence into the ocean.
They came back to the Nanaimo late in the morning. They parked the boat and they all split up and went their own ways, and Bosch had threatened them to not tell anybody as to what had occurred.
The young girl's incriminating testimony validates the statements made by her girlfriend. Corporal Rupa must decide if they are telling the truth.
She was displaying all the key components that register with me as somebody telling the truth, in the way she detailed out the events and the way her memory worked. It didn't strike me as being false in any way.
So after speaking with the second girl, we defined people's roles a little bit better and centralized more on Mr. Bosch having the responsibility of the murder.
With Rupa's conclusions, Glenn Forsley decides that he must move quickly to arrest the primary suspect, Stephen Bosch, before he disappears.
Later on in the day, we had established surveillance on Mr. Bosch at his residence, and we're in the process of getting ready to arrest him.
At the Royal Columbian Hospital in New Westminster, British Columbia, Dr. Craig Litwin has completed the autopsy of Mark Hanley. His report is forwarded to the RCMP.
The injuries that were of most significance with regards to identifying what happened to Mr. Hanley and what led to his cause of death were that there were blunt force injuries to his head. That is to say, injuries caused by the application of blunt force to, of course, the head region, resulting in injuries to the skin, to the bone, and to the brain.
Mark Hanley would likely have died from his head injuries, but there is some evidence that he was still alive when he was thrown into the water.
So depending upon the circumstances, water introduces an added layer of complexity to the postmortem examination and to the determination of why the person died. When a person goes into the water, they initially, and they are alive, there's an attempt to struggle to keep their head above water, and as they go under the water and are less able to continue breathing, they can begin to swallow large amounts of water. There's often an attempt to gasp each time they break the surface of the water, and as a result, you can often see the lungs overfilled with air because they're simply trying to breathe in as much air as possible.
I believe water was found in his stomach, not his lungs. So it would lead someone to believe that this person was still alive while they were floating in the water and they had ingested water.
It's not possible to determine the cause of death, but there is no doubt that Mark Hanley's murder was very violent. It's clear to investigators that this is a case of manslaughter, but a statement made by the 13-year-old witness could be evidence of a higher charge.
One of the girls alleged that there was some type of history between Mr. Hanley and Stephen Bosch. There was mention of a contract or some kind of communication by cell phone that Bosch was to harm Hanley due to a drug debt.
According to the 13-year-old girl, Stephen Bosch received a text message that night directing him to kill the victim.
The initial theme is that Bosch planned this all along, and someone was directing or ordering Bosch to harm Hanley.
This information could prove Bosch premeditated the crime. That could increase the charge against him from manslaughter to first-degree murder. Corporal Forsley serves a warrant to search Stephen Bosch's apartment. Bosch is gone, but they talk to his roommate.
Mr. Bosch obviously was uncomfortable with what had occurred. So he had told several people what he had done after the offense. You can call them disclosure witnesses. They had received some type of information from Bosch that he had done something bad. We knew that there was a large amount of forensic evidence on board. You'd have to assume that some of this blood or forensic material might have landed on him. He would have had contact with it. Priority was to conduct a search warrant on his house in the hopes of obtaining any clothing that was associated to him or that he had worn on the night of the offense, or any other material that might have been taken, because we know that Mr. Hanley did arrive at the boat with a quantity of cocaine. There might be some kind of residue left over just to corroborate what the witnesses had told us.
Corporal Rupa meets with the third witness in the case, a 16-year-old boy. Police suspect he may have helped Bosch dispose of Hanley's body.
He was hesitant to give us a statement. So I had to assure him that at this point it was strictly a witness statement to figure out from his perspective what had occurred that night. He then provided a statement to us that was very similar to what the two young girls told us.
Corporal Forsley has suspicions about the witness's statement. He thinks the young man is minimizing his involvement in the crime.
The young male was part of throwing Mr. Hanley overboard. So that was a concern. That was a red flag right away in regards to how do we treat this person? We can't be totally naive in regards to thinking that he had no involvement at all, but we couldn't assume how willing of a role this teenage male had. Was he coerced in doing it? Did he act freely? Was it more of a situation where he's being directed by the adult to throw Hanley overboard?
The statements from the two girls seem to exonerate the 16-year-old, but investigators are reluctant to draw the same conclusion about his role in the crime. With mounting evidence against Stephen Bosch, investigators decide to interview him, but Bosch has disappeared. Where could he be hiding? Has he already left British Columbia? The investigation into the murder of Mark Hanley continues. His body was found floating in Nanaimo Harbor in August 2008. Statements from 3 juvenile witnesses describe a brutal attack and murder on a boat in the marina the night before. Lead investigator Glenn Forsley obtains videotape from the Nanaimo Marina's surveillance system. His team has to scan more than 100 hours of footage. Corporal Rupa interviews a third witness, a juvenile male, but investigators don't believe that he is being completely truthful. The manhunt to find the prime suspect, Stephen Bosch, is in full swing.
We had sent members out to areas that we know where he was living. We had gone to Bosch's parents' house. He wasn't there anymore.
Investigators receive a tip that says Bosch may be staying with a friend in Parksville. It's a suburb a few kilometers north of Nanaimo. Glenn Forsley and Sorab Rupa investigate.
From the moment the incident was reported to when he was arrested was less than 3 days.
Bosch is arrested in Parksville and brought back to Nanaimo. Glenn Forsley takes his time to prepare for the first interview with the prime suspect.
You're essentially trying to find out what makes this person tick, what he likes, what he doesn't like. We do the best that we can. So it wasn't until later on that afternoon that we were prepared to interview Stephen Bosch.
Corporal Rupa asked the 14-year-old girl to reenact the events that took place on the boat on that tragic night.
So on August 8th, I met up with the elder of the two young girls, and I had along with me another investigator from our forensic identification section. I have found in my experience, witness reenactments serve a tremendous purpose as far as gathering better and more credible evidence from the witness.
The boat remains a secure crime scene since the evening of the murder.
Essentially, I gave her free rein to tell me what actually happened on that boat. And it was excellent because she was pointing out evidence that we had previously not known about. She could point out things within the cabin that were critical to us. A can that the victim had twisted to make a crack pipe, white powder, which was cocaine, on a CD case that would have been from the victim, things of that nature. As a result of her reenactment, I ended up seizing additional exhibits that had not been seized when the scene was processed. Another very important thing from an investigative purpose that I found in that reenactment was where the male, the young male, their friend was when Bosch pushed the victim Hanley over. And just the way she explained that, it was so spontaneous that it was credible in what she said to me.
Corporal Forsley begins questioning Stephen Bosch about the evening, but he is not very cooperative. Then Forsley tells him they've interviewed the 3 juvenile witnesses.
I interviewed him approximately 4 hours, and it wasn't until, let's say, about an hour and a half into the interview that he eventually started talking about the incident himself. He was remorseful for what had occurred. He couldn't describe his actions in regards to how it got so bad so fast. He blamed a lot on the drug usage, which could be used as a crutch. That was okay with me as long as he wanted to talk about the incident.
The first reenactment with the 14-year-old girl convinces Rupa that she can be more helpful to the investigation. Another reenactment is organized.
On August 11th, we took her on a police boat to try and identify where on the night of the homicide they had actually traveled to. She had told me that they had been disposing of evidence when they were out on the ocean.
Among the objects thrown overboard are an old suitcase stuffed with rags used to clean the crime scene. But the witness is never able to pinpoint where the murder weapon was discarded. The interrogation of Stephen Bosch continues, but Corporal Forsley realizes he will need to be more forceful to get details from him about the murder of Mark Hanley. Will Stephen Bosch admit to following orders from a drug dealer to settle a debt with Hanley? Could the 13-year-old witness have lied about the text message that Bosch received? Mark Hanley is found dead. His murder is reported by a young girl just hours before the discovery of the body. After a 3-day manhunt, the suspect, Stephen Bosch, is arrested. A second witness, another young girl, describes the events in 2 reenactments on board the boat where the murder took place. Her cooperation is a great help to the investigation. Lead investigator Glenn Forsley interrogates the suspect for several hours, but he is not cooperative. The youngest witness claims that Bosch received a text message that instructed him to murder Mark Hanley. When Forsley presses Bosch to talk about the fight in the cabin of the boat, the interrogation becomes more intense.
I started interrogating or questioning him hard in regards to his side of it, that the interview became confrontational because I was told things by other witnesses that might be diametrically opposed to what he had told us. So, of course, I'd have to find the truth. I can't just accept someone's word as gospel. It wasn't until the end of the interview that I had to discuss these areas that conflicted with Bosch's information that became more adversarial.
Bosch now claims he acted in self-defense because Hanley had attacked him. He blames his actions on his state of intoxication.
He described Hanley as either overdosing or becoming overly aggressive. And one thing led to another, and there was some type of confrontation about the cocaine. Hanley tried to take Bosch's cocaine. Bosch tried to protect his drugs, and Hanley stabbed Bosch in the hand or in the finger with a hypodermic needle. A hypodermic needle was never found on board. Numerous items were discarded by all the occupants of the boat. So who's to say whether there was or there wasn't? But that was Bosch's version of it, is that he felt that he was provoked. Bosch reacted overly aggressively. He says he lost it. He said he blacked out, but he recalled grabbing a wrench that was in and around the wheelhouse and then hitting Hanley repeatedly. I remember asking Bosch, how many times do you think you hit him? And I believe he said more than 10. Mr. Bosch told us that it was a long spanner or wrench. He described it as being approximately 2 feet in length, so a fairly substantial piece of metal. Also, a spike or a long screwdriver-like device was used on Mr. Hanley. During the autopsy, the pathologist had located wounds that were consistent with stab wounds on his body. The girls went so far as to saying that the beating occurred inside the wheelhouse, and they were able to see a snapshot of what was happening through a window that was on the door to the wheelhouse. The other teenage male was present when this was happening.
After the assault finishes, Bosch comes out and asks the male to help him. And the young male gets up and goes to help and essentially drives the boat out in the harbor, at which point Bosch disposes of what we are led to believe is a wrench. And that is most likely the actual murder weapon that was used in the assault. And once they leave the harbor area, once again, Bosch asks the young male to help him in disposing of the body. The young male helps Bosch, and they bring the male out. And he's pushed overboard.
Instinctively, Mark Hanley grabs the railing in an attempt to survive. That's when Stephen Bosch intervenes one last time.
There is a strike given, according to her, at one point, because the male is still clinging on after they've been pushed over the side of the boat. When the strike is given by Bosch, the young male has actually stepped back from the victim.
Mark Hanley slowly sinks into the waters of Nanaimo Harbor. The three teenagers are in shock from witnessing the violence.
They witness a horrific event. To kill somebody with a wrench is not an easy thing, and there's going to be a lot of pain and yelling and screaming involved. And then to witness that, followed by the disposal and then the cleanup, these kids were definitely impacted.
Bosch agreed or accepted responsibility for doing the majority of the amount of damage to Hanley.
In order to charge Bosch with murder, the prosecutors must prove that there was premeditation. The text message that the 13-year-old witness described could provide that proof.
The young girl had initially told Constable Sean Phillips that Bosch had received some type of communication, I believe it to be a text message, telling Bosch or directing Bosch to harm Hanley.
Bosch confesses to his role in the offense, but strongly denies receiving a text message to harm Hanley. Bosch is held in custody while he awaits formal charges. The police have spent days screening the footage from the marina surveillance system. It provides good evidence, but falls short of capturing the murder.
It didn't show us the incident, which is unfortunate because it's a little too far away from the camera, but we were able to establish what time the girls left the boat and what time Hanley arrived on the boat, and then what time they arrived after disposing of the body.
Investigators have built a strong case against Stephen Bosch, but Forsley is not satisfied. He would still like to find the murder weapon. Glenn Forsley requests the RCMP dive team to be assigned to the case. The divers used the information gathered by Corporal Rupa from the reenactments to define a search area.
So they set these markers out, which would incorporate that target area, and so they began searching there. Good visibility, shallow water, so they had a considerable amount of time at the depth there.
The dive team attempts to find the wrench that was used as the murder weapon. They also try to locate the suitcase full of rags and supplies that were used to clean the cabin. The area of interest is quite large, and the team uses a technique called sledding to cover the area.
There are two boards that are joined in the center by a pipe. They're 1 foot by 4 feet, and there's two divers down at a time, and they're towed by a topside boat, which will dictate the search pattern. So all the divers really have to do is hang on to the boards, and the boat will tow them in. Where the benefit is there that the divers aren't working, they're just hanging on, so air consumption is minimal, and depending on the visibility, large areas can be searched in shorter periods of time.
The recovery team works underwater for nearly 8 hours, but comes up empty-handed. The murder weapon is lost in the waters of Nanaimo Harbor. Forsley searches through Bosch's cell phone records for evidence of the text message that the 13-year-old witness described.
Something about a debt being owed for drugs, and that Hanley was to be killed over this debt.
If Bosch has indeed received a text message to kill Hanley, the prosecution can upgrade the charge against him to first-degree murder.
We didn't know the numbers, all the numbers that would have been involved, but all the basic ones, we covered the bases, but you can't account for numbers that you don't know about. So all the ones that we knew were associated to, let's say, Hanley or to Bosch, there was nothing like that. Some carriers don't have the memory in their system to have the actual text. They might only supply dates and times.
During the preliminary hearing, the 13-year-old witness drops a bomb. She says that Stephen Bosch never received a text message ordering him to kill Mark Hanley. She lied to the police from the beginning.
It wasn't the truth. Why the girl used that, I don't know. Maybe it was just to get some credibility to the story. Maybe she felt she wasn't being believed until she threw out this nugget that there was something a little bit more to it. But that's what we were told.
There are two major setbacks for the case. The evidence that would prove premeditated murder doesn't exist, and a key witness has lied and lost her credibility. Does the prosecution still have enough evidence for a jury to convict Bosch of first-degree murder? Mark Hanley's brutally beaten body is recovered from Nanaimo Harbor. Hours before the discovery of his body, a 13-year-old girl reports the crime to the RCMP. Two other young witnesses come forward. The second young woman proves to be an asset to the investigation. After disappearing for several days, the suspect, Stephen Bosch, resurfaces and is apprehended in Parksville. The prosecutors abandon the charge of first-degree murder after discovering that the 13-year-old witness lied about a text message that would prove premeditation. In June of 2010, the murder trial for Stephen Bosch begins. The prosecution enters a charge of second-degree murder due to a lack of evidence that would prove the crime was premeditated. First and second-degree murder can result in the same sentence. However, historically, second-degree murder convictions result in lighter sentences. The young witnesses have become uncooperative during the 2 years since the murder.
They were reluctant to be involved in the process from the onset, and to ask a teenager to be involved in the court process and having to testify at trial and point fingers and stand by to what they say, it goes against the code. I can't rat people out, I can't tell on someone else, I can't be a tattletale. So it was very difficult.
It will be particularly difficult for the 13-year-old witness who admitted to lying about her statement.
So you're dealing with that, use credibility right off the start. So their credibility is damaged. They've shown that they're capable of lying to the police and also mislead the courts as well. So obviously there's going to be some reluctance because it would be a hostile environment for a witness that has lost their credibility when faced with a defense counsel.
After several weeks, the defense offers the prosecution a guilty plea for involuntary manslaughter. With the case weakened by difficult witnesses, the Crown prosecutor weighs the chances of convincing a jury and decides to accept the defense's offer.
He was sentenced 8 years, and he was convicted of manslaughter.
The outcome of the trial was right in that we convicted a person of manslaughter based upon all the evidence that we could get out at trial. And I've got to be clear about that. It's what the evidence is at trial. It's not about, in many instances, what occurred, because they can be two separate things completely. And what occurs at trial is what the witnesses say and the evidence they give. And it's their moment, it's their day, and they're on the stand. And trials are made or lost depending upon what witnesses stay on the stand.
I would have liked to see a conviction for murder. But I think at the end of the day, we had the best outcome that we could have gotten under the circumstances.
Water can reveal evidence, and it can conceal evidence. For Mark Hanley, the waters of Nanaimo Harbor revealed his body, but concealed the evidence that could have convicted his murderer on a higher charge. This story unfolds on the Mississippi River that runs through the heart of Carleton Place, Ontario. It's a bedroom community for Ottawa, the country's capital city. It's a small town with a population of barely 5,000. Almost everybody knows each other, and no one suspects that there might be a murderer living among them. On November 10th, 1994, at 9:03 p.m., Constable Jim Birch is dispatched to the scene of an accident. A truck is overturned near a one-lane bridge that passes over the river just minutes away from police headquarters.
When I first arrived, there was a car just near the bridge, and a person whom I recognized as being Gary Samuels was in the car. He was hunched over, he had a coat over his shoulders, and there was also a young lady who was driving the car at the time. When I spoke to Gary and asked him what had happened, he said Barb is still in the truck.
Barbara Lanthier and Gary Samuels are married. A passerby is already standing on the overturned truck in the river, trying to help.
And I recognized the person as Glenn Pierce, standing on the undercarriage of the truck, and he had a flashlight. I went down to the water's edge, and by that time, Mr. Pierce had opened the truck door, and I asked him to shine his flashlight inside. I could see Barb's body inside the truck, floating face down. I would have went in the driver's door and stepped across. She was on the passenger side as the vehicle was upside down, and floated her out the driver's door towards the bank.
Barbara Lanthier is unconscious. Constable Birch knows he must act quickly.
It would only be 2 minutes in the water, 2 to 3 minutes at most. And back to the water's rock ledge, where we did CPR until the emergency vans arrived. She was taken away at that time, so the total time would have been approximately 10 minutes.
Gary Samuels, the victim's husband, is taken to the hospital in another vehicle. After the brief rescue in the icy waters, Birch is shivering from the cold. Dave McDonald is the investigator in charge of the case.
My estimate, 3 to 4 minutes of him actually entering the river, pulling her out, and then moving up, 3 meters up the cliff. He was telling me he was completely expended, and he fell to the grass because his legs wouldn't support him anymore because they had gone completely numb from the cold. He said then he just collapsed.
Constable Birch realizes that he is showing the symptoms of hypothermia. He knows there is little time to counteract the effects.
I took the cruiser, went home, changed my clothes, and at the same time drew a hot bath to try to get my body temperature up because I was shaking.
Medical staff at the hospital is trying to resuscitate Barbara Lanthier.
They have an expression in the medical community, you're not dead till you're warm and dead. So anyone who's been exposed to excessive cold, whether it be water or snow, if they come in and their vital signs absent, they continue to attempt CPR until the core temperature comes back up. And so they worked for a fair bit of time on Barb.
Jim Birch arrives at the hospital as the accident comes to its sad conclusion.
I met Dr. White, who was the attending physician. He explained to me that he had pronounced Barb Lanthier dead and that Gary Samuels was in a room across the hall. I asked permission to speak with him.
Jim Birch, Gary Samuels, and Barbara Lanthier are all part of the same social network.
I'd been with him at a social gathering. He was always quite jovial. But in this instance, it didn't seem out of character that he would be quite sullen. He had just been told by Dr. White that his wife was deceased. But he was quite coherent. I gave my condolences to Gary, and he started to explain to me what he had done prior to the accident. I wrote down the story word for word, directly in front of Gary.
Gary Samuels tells the officer that he picked up his wife when she was closing her business that night at 7:20 p.m.
Barbara was a hairdresser. She worked at a business called the Clip Joint on Bridge Street, the corner of Bridge and Allen Street, right in the center of the small downtown core of Carlton Place.
They were going to meet another couple in Carlton Place and then go to their dinner reservation. He said that they drove down Mill Street under the train tunnel bridge and towards the back bridges of the Mississippi River. He said that there was a truck or possibly a car making a wide turn. The vehicle didn't have headlights on, and he swerved to the left. He said that Barb screamed when they swerved. They went over a short piece of grassy area to the rock ledge. Then the truck tipped over into the water, and when it did, it filled up quickly with water. He realized he was upside down, and he was able to get his weight off the seat belt. Then he was able to orient himself as to which way was up and found an airspace in the truck. He said that he was in there a long time. He said that eventually he noticed that the driver's window was partly open. So he opened it the rest of the way, and he attempted to take Barb out of the truck with him, but she got caught on something, and he decided that there was no sense in both of them dying, so he escaped himself. and crawled up the riverbank. There was one car went by, and then the next vehicle stopped. And we arrived shortly after that.
And then out of the blue, he says, but Barb and I hadn't had a harsh word in years. He said she must have been scared. She doesn't swim. She only swims once a year. And we haven't had a harsh word in years. Jim at no point was suggesting anything, any kind of conflict between the two, but he seemed to feel it was important to add that.
Told me that he had picked Barb up at approximately 20 after 7, and the call came in at 9:03. It was approximately 9 minutes that he would have been in the water.
Constable Birch notes Samuel's condition after his long immersion in the icy waters.
He did ask the nurse at one point to cover his feet. However, I did notice that the sheet was not over his shoulders, that his upper body didn't appear to be cold or shaking.
Before leaving the hospital, Jim Birch asked the head nurse for some additional information about Samuels.
He complained of a headache, and one of the nurses said to me that when he was complaining of a headache, we bagged his clothing.
It appears that there was a strong smell of gasoline on his clothes.
And then I asked the people who worked on Barb Lancier, did her clothing smell of gasoline? And they said no. So that was interesting because Gary Samuels' version of events was they had both been exposed to the same event in the water for essentially the same length of time.
When Jim Birch leaves the hospital, he decides to gather a few key pieces of evidence from the accident scene.
Now, when he ended up back at the police station, he grabbed a thermometer out of the breath room and stuck it in the water and got the temperature of the water. We also had the air temperature that night, so we had water at 2 degrees Celsius, I believe, and air temperature at 4 degrees Celsius. And good on Jim Birch. That's not something I would have thought to do.
Constable McDonald didn't attend the accident the previous night. He visits the scene with Constable Birch, and their findings leave him puzzled.
The most alarming thing I heard was the description from Gary Samuels that involves sudden movements of the truck on the asphalt surface and then over the grass. And I mean, the first question that comes to mind is, why didn't you just put the brakes on? I knew that he couldn't have been going fast. You can't go fast there. I'm thinking, there's a lot of questions here that need to be asked.
Princess Street and Mill Street converge on the small, single-lane bridge where the accident occurred.
The back bridges are 2 bridges, one onto an island, one off. And you approach that first bridge from 2 streets, Mill and Princess. As you approach them, you have to go at an angle through a very old single-lane stone train trestle. So local drivers fully understand, A, you got to slow down and toot your horn or flash your lights at the train trestle, and you're not going any more than 5 or 10 kilometers an hour. You're going to take your mirrors off. Once you get through there, you got to watch for Princess Street because there could be somebody coming at the same speed approaching that single-lane bridge. So it's a virtually low-speed area. And it's not the kind of place where you would expect anyone would ever have enough speed to go off the roadway into the water.
Dave McDonald is one of the only investigators to raise any questions about the circumstances surrounding the accident.
I mistakenly thought at the very beginning, before I spoke to Jim Birch, that there had been impact, that somebody had come and hit him and he went off into the river. But then I find out there's no actual contact. So second is brake marks. There should be some brake marks. And in the absence of brake marks, if for some reason you don't brake, but you suddenly change direction, you're going to leave marks on the road. If you drive along in your car and suddenly yank the wheel one way or another, and the rubber tires turn suddenly, you're going to leave something on the pavement. There has to be some mark there.
Unfortunately, Gary Samuels' vehicle has already been towed from the scene before being properly examined.
Because there was no suspected foul play the first night, we didn't secure the scene the way you would normally secure a scene. So once we started to have concerns and they got significant enough, we sealed the scene at that point.
Based on his expertise as a former mechanic, Dave McDonald continues to look for clues that he feels are missing from the scene of this accident.
Well, you could clearly see where his vehicle had gone off, and you could just see where it went across, and you could see where it clunked on the way over. But all you saw was 2 marks. So when you turn your front wheels to the left, if you go off of one surface onto another, what you get is 2 sets of marks where your vehicle's turned on, and you get 2 more sets from your rear tires, because they will not follow exactly behind your front tires. They'll track a little inside of them. But initially in the turning, you should have had 4 marks go over there, not 2. Based on the geography of the scene and the description he provided, things couldn't have happened the way he said they happened.
Dave McDonald shares his doubts with Jim Birch and their superiors at the Carleton Place Police.
Quite frankly, I was making a number of people uncomfortable with all of the questions in the early going. And they were all still experiencing the tragedy of Barb's death. And I was stirring the pot in terms of asking a lot of questions.
Then Dave McDonald receives a surprising call from the funeral home where Barbara Lanthier's body is being held.
Gary Samuels said it was Barb Lanthier's wish to be cremated, and he wanted the cremation to happen that day. I was uneasy about some things, but the fact that he wanted to cremate her instantly, without even the attendance of her children, was a huge red flag to me.
Is it possible that Barbara Lanthier's death is not the result of a car accident? Are Dave McDonald's doubts justifiable? Can he succeed in convincing the coroner that an autopsy on Mrs. Lanthier is necessary? In November 1994, a truck is found overturned in the Mississippi River in Carleton Place, Ontario. One of the passengers, Barbara Lanthier, is pronounced dead. The other passenger, her husband Gary Samuels, survives. The following day, investigator Dave McDonald begins to have doubts about Samuel's story. That same day, police learn that Samuels wants to proceed with the immediate cremation of his wife. McDonald contacts the coroner to stop the procedure.
I'm not comfortable with the way he described the event. I'm not comfortable that we can't find the things I think should be at the scene. And the sudden cremation of this body before we have a chance to answer these questions is not okay, in my opinion. And I don't yet have enough, the way our system works, to suggest that a criminal charge is going to be laid. We're sort of way before that yet. But with your authority as a coroner, you can give me a warrant to have a post-mortem conducted on that body.
The coroner accepts Dave McDonald's arguments and orders an autopsy. Now McDonald and Birch have to inform Gary Samuels about the decision. Constable McDonald hears from the funeral director about the strange condition of Barbara Lanthier's body when he first received it after the accident.
Dean Adaman was funeral director at the time. It's his business to deal with the injury and so on to bodies. He said, look at her. She looks like she's been in a bar fight.
Dave McDonald tries to understand how these injuries could occur during a car accident.
I mean, she had a broken nose. She was lacerated up. She had interesting injuries. She had them at the top of her head, a significant impact to the front of her face, and significant impact under her jaw. And that's one of the things I'm thinking to myself. If we're dealing with a single impact event, and we know that the truck was actually going so slowly over that cliff edge, and you would think the instinctive reaction is to put your hands up or do something to protect your face. And incidentally, she had no injuries to her wrists, hands, elbows, shoulders, so there's no impact injuries to her in that way. And she did nothing to stop her face from smacking into either the dash or the windshield. Even supposing, extraordinarily, that the front of your face and the top of your face hits 2 different objects at the same time with impact, now you get the damage underneath. In my opinion, there's more than one thing has to happen to create the amount of damage that was done to her. How does all of that happen when there's only one clunk One of the funeral home employees showed us to a small office, and his back is to us. He turns, says hello to Jim, and he looks at me, and he had 3 marks down the front of his face, from his cheekbone to his jawline. And I remember I was shocked, because to me, it looked like someone had grabbed and scratched at his face. And I'll never, ever forget that visit.
Gary Samuels shows no emotion when Dave McDonald tells him that an autopsy has been ordered.
When we got out of the funeral home, I looked at Jim and I said, "Oh my God, did you see his face?" You know, what other explanation is there for that?
Constable McDonald takes his growing list of unanswered questions to his superiors. They give him 2 weeks to demonstrate that there is a crime behind the accident and that a criminal investigation is required. Dave McDonald then speaks with the witnesses who helped Samuels the night of the alleged accident.
When they stopped to speak to him, the first thing he did was describe the events that caused him to go over the edge of the cliff. What he said was, I was with Barb, we're driving along, and a car with no lights on came at me from the right, and I had to swerve. I went over the edge and went into the water, and Barb's in the truck. You got to get Barb out. And of course, when I heard that from the witnesses, and they were both clear on that immediately kind of set off a flag. Like, my goodness, you'd think that the first thing you'd be saying is, get my wife out, as opposed to, let me explain why I went in. So that struck me as strange.
The way Samuels described his escape from the overturned vehicle raises questions in McDonald's mind.
Given the amount of time that he was in there, if he could touch the door, he could reach and find the door handle, especially once you've had enough time to orient yourself to sort of where you are and what's happening. And if by pulling the door handle, the door popped open, and that's what happened for Glenn Pierce, it would certainly be easier. When you imagine to swim out the window in darkness entails taking a breath, submerging yourself in water where you can't see, and it's rapidly moving water once you get your head out that window, because the truck's now upside down. So you're effectively pinning yourself down there. Then you got to get yourself through that window opening and then stand up. It would be scary at the least, if not extremely difficult to do physically, I would think, when you had the option of just pulling the door handle.
The autopsy of Barbara Lanthier is carried out at Ottawa General Hospital on November 12, 1994, 2 days after her death.
Pathologists considered the circumstances, i.e. she's found in an overturned truck in the river, pulled out, and resuscitation attempts were unsuccessful. He noted the damage to her face. He told us she had what he referred to as a hangman's fracture. So the C1 and C2 vertebrae just at the base of your skull. It got the nickname hangman fracture years ago when capital punishment was hanging, and when the bodies dropped, the sudden dramatic force would snap the very top C1, C2 vertebra. So initially we did some work trying to understand what in this sequence of events could have caused that hangman's fracture.
Barbara Lanthier's body is returned to the funeral home in Carleton Place to be prepared for cremation. Fingernail scrapings are taken from her at that time.
Fingernail scrapings are generally taken in a case when you want to try and determine if she was trying to defend herself in any way and perhaps might have scratched the other person and got skin cells or DNA under her fingernails. And as it turned out in this case, we were supplied with a photograph of Mr. Samuels that showed distinct scratches down the right side of his face that potentially could have been from fingernails, from being scratched by someone.
After the accident, Gary Samuels' Ford truck is towed in for a forensic exam. Constable Dan McIver is responsible for gathering evidence. McIver must first determine that the truck's systems are all functioning properly.
I had a mechanic from Ministry of Transport for Ontario come in and do an examination of the vehicle to check the brakes and the underside of the vehicle to ensure that everything was working properly, and it was. Everything was fine.
McIver also conducts an inventory of the vehicle, noting every detail as he goes. He starts with the interior.
I would photograph it and record any of the damage that was done to it in the way of scratches, dents, the windshield being broken, that sort of thing. I examined the inside of the vehicle just to determine how the knobs were set, whether the ignition was on at the time, whether the vehicle was in park, reverse, that sort of thing.
While he is examining the exterior, he sees a detail that went unnoticed until now.
One of the other examinations that I did was to check the gas tank. The gas tank cap, when I looked at it, looked like it was sitting in a kind of a strange position. So on further examination of it, I was able to determine that it wasn't actually fitting on properly. So it was obvious when I examined it that in putting that gas cap on the last time, it wasn't fastened securely and was actually left open in a way that gas would be able to flow out of it if it were turned upside down.
Constable McIver learns that Gary Samuel's clothing smelled of gasoline the night of the accident.
This became interesting in the investigation when I was advised that Mr. Samuel's clothing was soaked in gasoline. The smell of gas was so strong at the hospital that they had to bag his clothing.
Dave McDonald examines the sequence of events and the evidence gathered to date. It raises a serious question about how long Samuel says he was immersed in the river.
In total, Jim Birch was wet and cold for about 3 minutes before he collapsed. And I mean, as the investigation progressed, the fact that Gary Samuel is suggesting he spent, between an hour and 90 minutes exposed to that kind of water and was functionally able to do a whole series of things. And we had the observations of the witnesses at the scene and then the nursing staff at the hospital, which was literally 8 or 9 blocks away, describing him being able to talk, move, and so on and so forth. It seemed way out of proportion to the experience Jim Birch had.
To answer his questions, McDonald calls on a hypothermia specialist, Dr. Giesbrecht from the University of Manitoba.
We contacted Dr. Giesbrecht, and he said, well, what we can do for you is we'll try to recreate that sequence of events, but we'll monitor the person that we have do this. So they built a big tank, like I'm talking maybe 10 feet by 8 feet, and it was chest high. They filled it with water and ice.
Jim Birch receives a surprising call just 2 days before the deadline to prove this is a criminal case.
I received a telephone call from Kevin Lantier, who was Barb Lantier's biological son. And he told me that he found a briefcase in a closet, and that the briefcase contained credit cards and insurance policies.
There was a handwritten note at the top of the insurance documents, and the note said, if Barb and I both go, look for 2.2 mil.
Dave McDonald reports to his superiors. He believes Barbara Lanthier's death is a murder disguised as an accident that is motivated by insurance fraud. Will the results from the hypothermia experiment prove that Gary Samuels lied about the time he spent in the icy waters? Can the purchase of multiple insurance policies prove that Gary Samuels was planning to kill his wife to collect the money? The accidental death of Barbara Lanthier is becoming a homicide investigation. Investigators are finding evidence that could prove her husband, Gary Samuels, was not telling the truth about their car accident. The police discover that Gary Samuels had taken out multiple insurance policies on his wife's life, worth more than $2 million. Dave McDonald analyzes the insurance policies and finds an interesting similarity between them.
Now, this is not just life insurance, but accidental death insurance and mortgage insurance. In total, I think there were 27 policies. At that time, in 1994, the industry standard was $150,000. So if a person died and their policy was $150,000 or less, what the insurance company required in order to effect a payout was a newspaper clipping saying the person had died and a death certificate from the coroner. So if you had both of those things, they'd pay you $150,000. Really no questions asked. Well, Gary Samuels purchased policy after policy after policy at $150,000 or less from different companies.
The Carleton Place Police don't have the resources to handle a homicide investigation, so they request assistance from the Ontario Provincial Police. The team decides that Jim Burt should no longer work on the case due to his relationship with Lanthier and Samuels. Forensic identification technician Dan McIver is interested in the fact that Gary Samuels' clothing smelled of gasoline. He devises an experiment to better understand what happened.
Mr. Samuels had indicated he was inside the vehicle for an hour and a half. However, his clothing smelled very strongly of gasoline, and there was no indication of any gasoline or gasoline smell on Miss Lanchay's clothes. So one of the tests that we wanted to try and do was to determine how long it would take that gasoline to run out of the tank when it was upside down and with the nozzle just slightly under the water. So an experiment was done in which we allowed the gasoline to drain out of the tank. And the time that it took for that gasoline to drain out was about 6 minutes. Actually, the drain nozzle is on the driver's side of Mr. Samuel's vehicle. So that would indicate to me that Mr. Samuel would have to have gotten out, and he did indicate he left through the driver's side window, I believe. He would have to have gotten out of that vehicle within the 6 to 8 minutes that it took for that gas tank to drain, and certainly not an hour and a half.
The investigators find a witness who saw Gary Samuels at his home the night of the accident.
A neighbor saw them there at 7:30, and he was able to place them there based on a television program. He watched the television program until 7:30, and he got in his truck 8 doors away and drove down past. He saw Gary's truck. He was able to tell us how it was angled, that it was running, that the lights were on. Gary was walking away from the truck into the house, and Jim was clear on all of that, and he was clear on the time. So I don't think Gary went directly from the clip joint to the water. I think he went back to their residence at Lakeshore Drive.
The neighbor's statement opens up a theory that Samuels may have murdered Barbara Lanthier in their home. Investigators speculate that Samuels stopped at home to let Barbara prepare for a dinner engagement with friends. As she walked into the house, Samuels attacked her and forcibly held her face down in the hot tub until she drowned. This could explain the bruising that Lanthier sustained that was not consistent with a car accident. Then Samuels could have put Barbara's body into the truck, drove to the bridge, and staged the accident a short time later. Dave McDonald receives the results from Dr. Giesbrecht's hypothermia experiment. Normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. A person becomes hypothermic when their core temperature falls below 35 degrees Celsius. In a state of moderate hypothermia, there is difficulty walking and talking. The body shakes uncontrollably, and the extremities, fingers and toes, will turn blue. Below 30 degrees Celsius, the main organs stop functioning and death will occur.
So Perry just gets colder and colder and colder. So as Perry gets to the point where he's been in almost 90 minutes, he's shivering. I've never seen anything like this. Perry's shivering were entire body convulsions, like jerking, spasming convulsions. So they're trying to ask him questions to see if he can speak. And he'll say a word or two, and then his entire body seizes up with shiver spasm. We compared Perry's ability to that of Gary Samuels, who was talking to the nurses, providing a full statement to Jim Birch, complaining of a headache. To my mind, clearly, Gary Samuels did not spend 90 minutes submerged in 4-degree water. There's no way in the world he was in that water for that long.
Would the hypothermia experiment be proof enough to convince a jury? If Samuels could not survive 90 minutes in the water, then where was he? Could he have been at home murdering his wife? In November 1994, the accidental death of Barbara Lanthier becomes a criminal investigation. Hypothermic testing reveals that it is nearly impossible for Samuels to have been in the frigid waters of the Mississippi for 90 minutes. A neighbor tells police that he saw Gary Samuels and his truck at their home at the same time that Samuels claimed to be trapped in the river. Investigators obtain a warrant to search Samuels' home.
We were also interested in the chemicals that were in the house because they have a hot tub, and we were one of our thoughts was perhaps that death may have occurred within the hot tub. So we wanted to have those chemicals to check with some of the biological exhibits that we did receive from the autopsy on Ms. Lanche. I had done a water sample from what was left in the hot tub. I had also observed some brownish stainings in the spa room on the steps. Those were all checked with a hemastick, which would turn to a specific color if they were blood, and they all turned out to be negative.
The search of Samuel's house yields no direct evidence. Investigators obtain a search warrant for his lawyer's office.
We found a number of things of great interest there. One we found was his Province of Ontario life insurance sales license. He was a licensed life insurance sales person. So he absolutely understood how to acquire it at a level where there would be no investigation. And he also understood, like we discovered, there is no central registry for insurance in the province of Ontario. I can't dial a number and say, can you check Gary Samuels and tell me how much life insurance he has and what company he's with? There was no central data bank or registry for that.
Investigators discover how Gary Samuels paid for 27 insurance policies.
He acquired numerous credit cards, and he began to have the monthly premium for each of these insurances billed directly to his credit card. And then he insured the life of himself and his spouse on each credit card. As that debt mounted, he had no concerns about ever having to pay it off. Because the minute Barb Lancier died accidentally, those policy premiums would be completely wiped out because the credit cards were all covered for her death. And the credit card companies ask no questions. Doesn't matter how you die, as long as you are dead, they will pay off the balance. They'll just wipe out the balance. I'd never seen anything like it.
Dave McDonald discovers that Samuels frequently purchased travel insurance. He visits the agency to ask a few questions.
I stopped in and said, "Hi, I'm Dave McDonald with the police department. I'd like to talk to you about Gary Samuels, and he's done some travel here, and I'd really like to talk to you about." And I could tell immediately that something was wrong, and her face was just absolutely ashen when she looked at me. She was on the verge of tears. She said, "I knew you would come. My husband said you would come." 3 o'clock on the 10th of November, 1994, they receive an anonymous call. It's a male caller, and he says to the travel agent, "I just want to confirm that if I purchase that insurance, and I'm driving in my car in the province of Ontario, and there's an accident, and the person named in the policy dies, do you get your 150 grand if you die in your car in the province of Ontario? And the insurance, or the travel lady says, I don't think so. Gary Samuels comes in maybe 2 hours later. The manager comes out. He says to her, oh, you recognize my voice? That was me on the phone. So let's have this discussion. So if somebody dies in the car, in the province, but they're buying it so they can go out of province, they still get paid, right? And she says, yeah, I think you're right. I think it does say that. I swear. Thank you very much. And by 9 o'clock at night, she was dead in his vehicle in the province of Ontario.
Will the statements from the travel agent give investigators enough evidence to prove premeditated murder? Will MacDonald finally be able to arrest Gary Samuels for the cold-blooded murder of his wife? Mounting evidence turns a fatal car accident into a homicide investigation. The victim's husband will collect more than $2 million in life insurance benefits. The investigation uncovers an intricate insurance fraud scheme. It includes a policy that was issued the day before her death. On June 6, 1996, 18 months after Barbara Lanthier's death, Gary Samuels is arrested and formally charged with first-degree murder. During the preliminary inquiries, the investigators decide to revisit the cause of death. For a second opinion, they contact Dr. Chasson, chief pathologist for the province of Ontario.
We ultimately did a full sort of review of the pathology done at the postmortem, and on further review of the x-rays, there was no fracture at C1 and C2. So that was a bit of a red herring.
Dave MacDonald asked Dr. Chasson his opinion about the extensive bruising observed on Barbara Lanthier's body.
His expert opinion, based on what he reviewed, was that drowning was a diagnosis of exclusion. So in the end, what we got from both Dr. Wenckebach and then further from Dr. Chasson was that simple drowning wasn't indicated here. Dr. Chasson also commented on the extent of the head and face injuries and the bony injuries caused to Barb Lantier, and his opinion was that they were not consistent with the story as provided by Gary Samuels.
Dr. Chasson's opinion suggests that Barbara Lanthier could have been killed before the accident. The prosecution argues that Gary Samuels' truck was moving too slowly when it entered the river to be a real accident. The defense counters the prosecution can't estimate the speed of the truck because no measurements were taken at the scene.
One of the things we did not do that night, because it was a rescue effort, not a murder investigation at the time, was we did not measure the distance the truck was out in that channel, because they were, far more interested in trying to save that life.
Dave MacDonald contacts Cy Kelly, a specialist in the rectification of single-image photography. He has worked for British military intelligence and the U.S. Marines. Kelly can accurately recreate a scene from a photograph so that measurements can be taken.
He took a photograph of the Gary Samuels truck in the river with the bumper facing downstream, and he laid an acetate on top of it. So he scratched the bumper, and he scratched significant points on the rocky cliff that had not changed.
Mr. Kelly builds a pinhole camera that is the same focal length as the camera that took the original photograph from the scene. He mounts the marked acetate to the cardboard camera. The next step is to recreate the photograph that was taken during the event.
We brought the editor of the paper, Jeff McGuire, and his 55mm camera back to the scene, showed him the picture and said, where did you stand when you took the pictures? And he said, I was right at the end of the guardrail when I took this series.
Mr. Kelly then sets the pinhole camera up at the same position as the original camera.
So what happens then is, when you look through the pinhole at the back of the 55mm deep box, and through the acetate that's been fastened to the front, you see the scratches of the cliff, and you can line them up exactly with those parts of the cliff that haven't moved or changed in 4 years.
While viewing the scene through the marked acetate, Kelly is able to see exactly where Samuel's truck laid in the Mississippi River.
He took the bumper off the front of the actual truck, put the divers back in the water, and the first thing he said was flip the bumper upside down. They did that. He got them to raise it 6 inches, move forward, stop, move back, lower that edge, stop. And when he stopped, he let me look through the pinhole, and my goodness, the scratched bumper was exactly over top of the real bumper in real life. And he said, measure it right from there. And we measured the distance from the edge of the bumper to the cliff. It was 2.9 meters. So we knew then exactly how far out the truck was that night.
With these measurements, investigators are able to calculate an accurate estimate of the speed of the truck when it drove over the edge. The preliminary hearing lasts 2 years, from 1997 to the end of 1998. The trial finally opens April 9, 2001, nearly 7 years after the events. After only 8 weeks, the trial ends with the conviction of Gary Samuels.
It was one of the most carefully planned, strategic financial murders I've ever even heard of, frankly. And it was his greed, and the judge said this, Judge Roy on the first trial said this, it was his greed that really gave him away.
The sentence of life in prison without parole for 25 years is announced. Samuel's lawyers immediately begin working to appeal the decision. Gary Samuel's appeal is heard, and a second trial begins 13 years after Barbara Lanthier's death. The second trial lasts 3 months, and the original verdict is upheld. Gary Samuels remained in Kingston Prison, where he died of cancer in 2010. A crime of greed, committed in cold blood. It could have gone unpunished without the determination of the lead investigator. The community of Carleton Place has since regained its tranquility. But the icy waters of the Mississippi River will forever hold the memory of Barbara Lanthier's murder. This crime takes place in Cloverdale, a suburb of Surrey located southeast of Vancouver, British Columbia. It begins when a 10-year-old girl goes missing from outside her home. Hundreds of police and volunteers will search for her. A scientist with a keen sense of observation will unravel her disappearance. October 1st, 2000. A call comes into the RCMP detachment in Surrey at 5:30 p.m. A father reports the disappearance of his daughter. Her name is Heather Thomas. In cases involving missing children, time is of the essence. Police move quickly. A search is organized around the perimeter of the complex where Heather spends weekends with her father. The lead investigator is Constable Peter Cross from the Violent Crimes Division of the RCMP.
Statistically, within the first 3 or 4 hours, if the child is not found, it becomes highly problematic, and chances are you're dealing with a criminal offense.
Peter Cross knows that child abduction cases can become very complex. Constable Chris Drotar is also assigned to the investigation.
I was a file coordinator. My role was to take in all the information that the investigators generated on during the investigation, file it away, review it, determine if there's anything that needs to be done, decide a course of action, basically manage the paper end of the file. She was a few of her friends, and they were playing in the townhouse complex on that afternoon, in preparations of going back home to her mother, around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the little boys in the complex had received a new bicycle, and he was letting the other children in the complex take turns riding it around the complex and just enjoying a sunny afternoon.
When Heather gets her turn, she rides the bike around the complex. This is the last time she will be seen.
When they went out looking for her and couldn't find her, they found the bike that she was borrowed near the front of the complex, probably 50 feet from the main road. And then what struck me at the time was the bike wheel was actually still turning when they found it. So that was significant to me because obviously it puts a bit of a time frame as to, or something sudden having happened. I'm not liking the situation when I arrive at 11:30 at night. It's not feeling right. It's feeling like there's more to this. They called us primarily because they thought that Dad was acting somewhat peculiar.
Constables Cross and Drotar meet with Heather's father.
Dad and Mom shared custody of Heather, and it was Sunday evening, so he was in the process of getting them ready to go back to Mom's when he discovered that she wasn't late coming in. Her knapsack was packed and ready to go at the front door. We spoke to Dad for well over an hour, talking to him and running through the times as to what had transpired and his daughter going missing, and we determined that it was impossible for him to have done anything.
Peter Cross assigns Constable Jeff Parks to talk with Heather's mother.
Well, she was distraught. She was devastated. It's a very difficult time. She presented exactly what you'd expect from a mother who just lost her daughter.
The police quickly determined that she has no clues to the disappearance of her daughter. A command center is set up near the complex. Within a few hours, the investigation into the disappearance of Heather Thomas reaches extraordinary proportions.
Once we got past that initial 12 hours, we were treating it as a suspicious and a possible homicide. The investigative team started expanding fairly quickly. And I think it eventually grew to 45 or 50 in terms of investigators.
What we brought in were people from Surrey Detachment and E Division Major Crime Sections, and they have specific training in generating a truthful version of events from children. So we brought them in and to interview all of the friends that were playing in the complex that day with Heather, and to determine if they could, if they were a witness to her going missing that day.
The townhouse complex where Heather's father lives is searched thoroughly. The RCMP leaves no stone unturned.
They went through the parking lot, they recorded all the license plate numbers, and as people got up the next morning, being a Monday morning, we didn't want to miss them and any kind of evidence we could find, so we had those people posted there, and they interviewed them as they left on their way to work.
You have to picture the complex. There's a lot of kids in the community, so there's people around. Across the street is the Cloverdale Fairgrounds, which had the flea market that day, so thousands of people there. And also the racetrack is there. And of course now you had the police presence, so it became quite a bit at that time.
The media presence is growing. They are constantly monitoring police activity and are quick to sniff out a story that will make headlines.
This was now gathering in quite intense media coverage, and it was getting media coverage, I would say, initially through the West Coast, and then it became nationwide, then it became North America-wide, then it became in Europe even.
Investigators immediately discovered that the densely populated city of Cloverdale has a disturbing concentration of known sex offenders.
There's always suspects. Pick any neighborhood, I'll find suspects. So for instance, if we went and looked at sex offenders living in the Surrey area, we found out we were in the thousands.
I think there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 sex offenders that lived within a 4-block radius of where Heather went missing that day.
Peter Cross focuses the investigation in a 6-kilometer radius of the complex. He dispatches investigators to contact all of the 60 known sex offenders. The search to find Heather grows in magnitude and intensity.
We're into day 3. There was probably 6 command centers over there. The American authorities, Vancouver City Police. We had police officers volunteering to come in. We had dog sections that came up on their own expense from the States. We had bloodhounds from Whatcom County.
At the high point, there was 1,200 volunteers coming forward.
Peter Cross calls in the RCMP underwater recovery team to search the ponds between Heather's home and the Cloverdale Fairgrounds.
There was ponds, water-filled ponds in those areas, and these were in very close proximity to Heather's home. So what we were looking for in the ponds was perhaps Heather had maybe wandered over there and fallen into the pond, so we were thinking that may have been what happened to her. So we were looking for her, and if not her, any evidence that connected to that case.
Peter Cross and his team are buried under a mountain of evidence and reports that all require follow-up.
They turned up clothing, socks, pants, shirts. We had a description of what Heather was wearing at that time, but everybody was playing it safe.
Despite the scale of the investigation, volunteers continue to pour in. Police officers volunteer their time. Everyone involved in the search for Heather Thomas continues to hope. Has Heather been kidnapped by a sexual predator? Could her attacker be hiding among the hundreds of volunteers who are searching for her? On October 1st, 2000, the RCMP begins a search for 10-year-old Heather Thomas, who is missing. She lives in a suburb of Surrey, British Columbia, that is also home to more than 60 sex offenders. Within a few days, more than 1,200 police and volunteers join the search. Lead investigator Peter Cross has extensive knowledge with child abduction cases. He knows that aggressors are often predictable when covering their tracks. One of these modus operandi is what investigators call secondary displacement.
Basically what happens is the suspect doesn't feel comfortable with the initial placement of the body and returns to move it again. My thought process at the time is let's shut the searches down, which were pretty extensive by this time. We're operating on the theory that it would have to be somebody in that complex or visiting the flea market next door, somebody familiar with the area. Let's shut it down, let them believe that the search is over, in the hope that that may prompt the suspect to move the body a second time, either to a Smith right or something. And then we would go back and research again.
The public search is suspended for a few days. Unfortunately, the tactic doesn't pay off and no new clues surface. The team restarts the ground search from where they left off. Investigators continue to follow up on the innumerable leads they have. Some of them are quite unusual and show how the entire community hopes for the safe return of Heather.
We would go to interview a sex offender and he'd already have a statement written out. Because he said, I knew you're coming to see me and this is where I was and here it is, and they would hand over you a statement. So it's a little bit unique circumstances in those cases.
21 days after Heather goes missing, a chilling lead is reported 35 kilometers away from where she was last seen. A hiker in Golden Ears Provincial Park finds what looks like the body of a child along the shore of Alouette Lake. Investigator Peter Cross and his team are alerted and immediately make their way to the scene.
By the time we arrived there, it was dusk. The park gates were already closed, and the sides of the roads were lined with vehicles of people and media wanting to know what would happen and if it was in fact Heather, but you know, you had that sinking feeling.
Investigators can only estimate how long the body has been immersed in Alouette Lake.
There's no signs of trauma. It appeared that she'd been in the water for some time.
She was still wearing some of the jewelry that we were looking for.
The body is identified as Heather Thomas. For the hundreds of volunteers and investigators, this is a very sad conclusion to 3 weeks of intensive searching. The body is transported to the Royal Columbian Hospital for an autopsy. The following day, Golden Ears Park remains closed and the investigation continues.
They had been lowering the levels of the lake. The lake we were seeing that day, at the day that Heather would have gone into the lake, would have been significantly different looking.
Alouette Lake is in the heart of Golden Ears Provincial Park. British Columbia's electricity producer has built a hydroelectric dam that connects to the lake. The water levels vary considerably depending on the season and the demand for electricity.
In fact, the water would have been 40 feet higher up the beach. So, considering putting all those factors in play, and we had hydrologists come in and were telling us how this all worked. So using those kind of calculations, we were able to say, okay, if we search this beach, we got to search the area that she could have been in water. So it was like a 40-foot size beach area that had to be covered as well.
They want us to conduct an underwater search outward and to both sides of where the body was located. Again, just looking for any evidence that might be related to the case. This case is unique in that the lake out there was crystal clear. We had 25 feet plus visibility. And again, we were able to search and clear what we refer to as the target area without using any scuba.
RCMP divers discover a dark shape in a few meters of water, not far from where Heather's body was found.
A big importance for us in our investigation was a Winwell hockey bag found in the lake. I believe it was about 20 meters or 25 meters from where Heather was found in the water. In the bag, we recovered some rocks used to weight the bag down. So that left us with the opinion that that's how she'd been transported to the lake. The hockey bag itself had a broken zipper on it, on the top, so it left it approximately half to 3/4 open, so it couldn't completely close her inside of it, so I'm assuming that's how she floated away.
In an area of the shoreline that was previously underwater, investigators find more evidence.
A number of items were found of Heather's. What I recall is a little bracelet that she had, a little baby blue bracelet that was found on the shoreline.
While the investigators continue at Alouette Lake, the autopsy gets underway.
We could find no sign of cause of death. No obvious blunt trauma, no obvious wounds like a stabbing or strangulation or anything along those lines. Again, we have to keep into mind the decomposition by this stage. So it's your classic body in a water problem in that it doesn't necessarily help you a lot in terms of figuring out exactly what happened.
We took the x-rays and then we got the actual original dental x-rays from Heather's dentist. I think it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon that David Sweet said that this is Heather Thomas.
The body is confirmed to be Heather Thomas. Now the missing persons file officially becomes a murder investigation. Jeff Parks thoroughly inspects the sports bag found in the lake near the body.
I saw that there was plant material in the bags of the hockey bag and in the bag itself. What really stood out were the fern leaves, like they're sword ferns. And that's when I made the connect back to her hair that there's actually this hockey bag can be linked to Heather in more than one fashion.
Jeff Parks looks for a specialist who can analyze the plant fragments. Investigators hold a press conference stating that the body discovered in Alouette Lake is indeed Heather Thomas. The announcement generates a very interesting lead.
One of the dispatchers in Maple Ridge Detachment was watching it on TV at home. And this lady remembers the day Heather disappeared because she was dispatching at the time in Maple Ridge. She takes the time to go back to the detachment when all this kerfuffle was going on and pull the dispatch ticket. And she said, oh yes, I remember we had this one suspicious vehicle. So she came to a couple of other investigators and said, you know, you may be interested in this. I looked at it and it basically was a possible suspicious vehicle seen at Golden Ears Park the day of Heather's disappearance. As it turned out, it was park employees that had called in the original complaint. They thought it was suspicious and that the guy had a hoodie over his head. The vehicle was somewhat unique and he was driving so slowly in the park, and then of course it's October, so there's not an awful lot of activity in the provincial parks at that time.
And a little later on, they found the vehicle in the park, but it was pulled over on the side of the road and had its hood up. And then they spotted it again, and it was now leaving the park. And this time it was leaving at a much higher rate of speed. So they made the report into police. Later that day as well, one of them recalled seeing the same car, same license plate at the boat launch area. I believe it was around noon the same morning.
The park rangers describe the vehicle as a collectible car. It is a 1970 Chevy Impala lowrider, and they have the license plate number.
The license plate number came back to an address in Vernon. She checked for the BC driver's license that's associated to that license plate. And she ran that, and she goes, boy, I could just feel my heart pounding out of my chest when I seen the address show up for the complex where Heather went missing that day. There was just an unbelievable feeling inside of her that, wow, now we have a suspect for the murder of Heather.
Investigators are intrigued by the fact that the suspect changed his address from Vernon, BC to Cloverdale on October 2nd, the day after Heather's disappearance. Could this suspect be Heather Thomas's murderer? Or is it simply an extraordinary coincidence? On October 1st, 2000, the RCMP detachment in Surrey begins an investigation into the disappearance of 10-year-old Heather Thomas. The community has been part of a search unprecedented by any other in Canadian history. Over 1,200 volunteers participate. 21 days after Heather's disappearance, her body is recovered from Alouette Lake in Golden Ears Park, 35 kilometers from her father's home. An RCMP dispatcher remembers a report of a suspicious car in Golden Ears Park the day after Heather went missing. Investigators are surprised that the trace from the vehicle registration shows that the owner lives in the same complex as the young victim. He becomes the primary suspect.
I was pretty ecstatic at that time. Like, this was finally the first big lead in a case. Now, having said that, we have no evidence other than a car driving through the park. But to us, this was highly significant. And it just, like I say, we don't believe in coincidence too much.
The suspect's name is Shane Ertmode, a construction worker in his early 20s, originally from Vernon, British Columbia. The investigation regains momentum. Chris Drotar revisits the reports gathered from Heather's housing complex.
Shane Ertmode's name had surfaced 3 other times within our investigation. Once on the night of the murder itself, when the initial canvass went out that night about midnight. He phoned into the RCMP detachment and reported his home had been broken into during the afternoon hours.
The third time that Shane Ertmode's name surfaced was at the police checkpoint in the complex, just hours after Heather's disappearance.
So we had Ertmode leaving his place, his house, It was somewhere around 5 o'clock in the morning. Like, it was way out of character because he didn't start work until I think it was 9 o'clock. So him leaving that early in the morning, and then the security guards picking him up in Golden Ears Park at 5:45 or 6 o'clock, somewhere around there. It all fits. Like, he's left his apartment to go back to Alouette Lake for some reason.
Constable Alain Bouchard investigates an unrelated incident in the same complex.
I went the day after Heather Thomas was reported missing. I went to the residence and I met with Mr. Ertmode.
Bouchard was responsible for investigating a burglary that Shane Ertmode reported to the RCMP.
When I arrived, I noticed the apartment had been cleaned. The carpet had been vacuumed, and when I came down the stairs, I noticed football equipment on the floor, as if a bag had been emptied out. So at the time, I asked Mr. Ertmode if they had stolen his bag.
Burglars often use sports bags or suitcases they find at the scene to carry their stolen goods.
I looked everywhere in his townhouse, and I asked him what had been stolen. He told me only cash. There was absolutely nothing else missing. Only money was missing. At that point, I looked for what might be a point of entry into the residence. And there was a window right next to the sliding door in the bedroom, and it looked like there was a print from the palm of a hand on the window. Again, I asked Mr. Ertmode if anything else had been stolen, and he told me no. I found this a little bit strange because he had a television, a VCR, he had a baseball card collection and a hockey card collection, and neither of which had been touched. And naturally, those are the kinds of things that could easily have been stolen.
But what captures Constable Bouchard's attention is how nervous Ertmode is.
He was always next to me, asking me a lot of questions about the work I was doing. He was always at my side to the point where I had to ask him to move over so that I could take photographs. He never left me alone in any part of the residence. He literally followed me from the time I knocked at the door to the time I left. He was always right beside me.
Bouchard's intuition tells him to document more than usual for a complaint of break and enter. His detailed report lands on Peter Cross's desk.
What we had was a possible fellow who was in the park that comes from the complex. So that's it. Obviously at a weird time of day. Obviously there's got to be some explanation. But other than that, we had nothing.
He's the only person, and the number is astronomical, of the potential suspects. We go from, I'll say, 600 people that are potentials to Ertmode. He's the only one that has a connection to Heather Thomas.
So my thought was the only advantage we have at this time was the element of surprise. He can't know that we're coming. How do you do that? Well, you have to go into a covert kind of mode. The other thing is we didn't know anything about him. So part of the thought process now is we have somebody that has killed a child living in the complex, surrounded by children. So the public safety factor is now off the scale.
Peter Cross orders 24-hour surveillance of Ertmode to ensure the suspect does not reoffend. He also asks for a covert warrant to search and gather evidence from Ertmode's apartment.
We're going to seize his vehicle, we're going to search his home, we're going to dig up all the background that we can on Mr. Ertmode to see who he is and maybe he has a propensity for this type of crime.
The covert warrant is served on the suspect's home. Constable Bouchard leads the team because he has already been inside Ertmode's townhouse.
When the forensic team went in there, they were looking for fingerprints and hair and fiber, her clothing, maybe her DNA if she had touched something.
I did what we call taping. Now, taping is when you take a piece of packaging tape and then you get down on the carpet. You're looking for clothing fibers. We look for hair. You look for anything that may have fallen on the floor.
We found his little treasure trove of mementos. He had a shoebox full of, he had the gas receipt. He had his registration from renewing his driver's license on the 2nd of October, which was perfect because now we had a photograph of how he looked that day when all of our witnesses saw him in the park.
There were 2 receipts that were very interesting. One was a receipt from Colossus Movie Theater in Langley, where he had bought a ticket to go to see the movie The Exorcist. The other was a gas receipt from a garage just across the street from the theater in Langley.
The operation is successful. The receipts are evidence that Ertmode was trying to create an alibi.
We're thinking this is great stuff, you know. Now we know his story. Like, this is going to be his play that, no, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, and here's my evidence.
Investigators let Ertmode believe that his car has been stolen. Constable Bouchard gets to work searching the vehicle in the RCMP's Surrey garage.
The inside of the car was very clean. When I started to take the carpet out, I discovered that the subcarpet was completely soaked. It was so soaked that when I squeezed it, water poured out. It was completely saturated with water. I found that troubling. At that point, I began to look at the vehicle to see if there was a leak somewhere like the windshield. One experiment I tried to do was I sat in the car and I asked one of my partners to take a water hose and to spray down the car. What I noticed was that it wasn't leaking. So that indicates that somebody brought the water into the car. I think probably to clean the carpets.
So it almost like it had been power washed on the inside. It just showed he's gone through a very thorough process to clean this car out.
Constable Parks has found a forensic botanist to analyze the plant fragments found in the girl's hair and the sports bag. He sends the samples to Dr. Ralph Matthews at Simon Fraser University.
All of the compartments had some plant material and sand and material in it. The main compartment had some quite large pieces of twigs and greeny, leafy material at the bottom. There's a very common evergreen fern that is very common in the coastal rainforests around the lower mainland area and Golden Ears Park, called Christmas fern, or the Latin name is Polystichum unitum. And I saw some pieces of that. There were also some leaf fragments that looked like their typical sort of salmonberry type leaves and twigs, ferns material, some moss material.
And the other thing was part of the botanical was charred wood, so burnt wood. Now the forest around Alouette Lake had been logged some 80 years previous, so even though people figure it's old growth or ancient forest, it's a cedar jungle, so when it's logged it got burnt off, so there is charcoal around there.
I wasn't expecting to find anything burnt in there. It sounded like someone scooped up something from the ground or from a log that had been burnt.
Dr. Matthews did his PhD studies in Golden Ears Park, so he is very familiar with the vegetation around Alouette Lake.
He identified 13 varieties of botanical, whether there be seeds, plants, or mosses and grasses. He said they're all from the forest around Alouette Lake except this juniper. So there's 13, including the juniper, 12 that are native to that area of the lake or the park. So I said, well, that's nice to know, but that's just like every other forest around the lower mainland. And he said, no, to have 12 different plant varieties coexist in one small location is where your probability gets astronomically great.
Investigators verify the receipts found in Shane Ertmode's apartment. A movie ticket is of particular interest.
Turns out there's 26 video cameras inside for security. So we went back and we actually had an officer go through in real time 12 hours of footage for 26 video cameras. And we were able to say at the end of it that he bought a ticket. It was a ticket for this show at this show. But we could categorically say he never entered that theater or he never came out of that theater.
So he's got 3 different alibis that he's purported separately. And one, he's got a gas receipt, he's filling his car up with gas. The other one is he's at a movie. And then the other one is that he was out and somebody broke into his house. We could make all these connects, even though they are circumstantial, they're still connects that relate him right back to the crime.
All of the evidence found in Ertmode's apartment is circumstantial. Will Peter Cross and his team risk an arrest without direct evidence? In Cloverdale, British Columbia, an investigation that is unprecedented in Canadian history is underway following the disappearance of a 10-year-old girl. On October 22, 2000, a body is recovered from the waters of Alouette Lake. Using dental records, the body is identified as Heather Thomas. A report made by Golden Ears Park Rangers leads the RCMP to the owner of a suspicious vehicle seen in the park shortly after Heather's disappearance. The suspect, Shane Ertmode, is placed under 24-hour surveillance while an undercover forensic team searches his apartment with a fine-toothed comb. Investigators gather numerous pieces of circumstantial evidence. Shane Ertmode's arrest is looming. Unexpectedly, Ertmode moves out of the complex in Cloverdale just a few days after the discovery of Heather's body.
I rented the apartment for a period of time and said, here, go to it. It's yours to go through. So it gave the forensic team initially that went in time to go through the entire apartment even more thoroughly than they did before.
I was able to find a print, a very small fingerprint, indicating to me that it came from a small person, either a child or somebody with small hands. I photographed it, and I lifted the print, and then I sent it to our database. However, one of the unfortunate things about children is that they don't sweat very much, so they don't leave a lot of fingerprints on surfaces.
Constable Bouchard and his colleagues spend several days in Ertmode's old apartment.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to identify any traces of DNA belonging to Heather.
On November 3, 2000, 2 weeks after the discovery of Heather Thomas's body, Peter Cross obtains an arrest warrant for Shane Ertmode.
There's no shortage of volunteers to finally arrest him.
Basically, we stopped the car. I went around the passenger side, opened the door, and told Ertmode he was under arrest for the murder of Heather Thomas, to which he replied. He looked over at his driver and he said, "Is this a joke?" And then just kept going on, "This is a joke," you know, and I just pulled him out of the car and said, "No joke."
Ertmode is taken to the Surrey detachment of the RCMP to be interviewed. He's held overnight for questioning the next day.
He didn't say much for about 3 hours, 4 hours. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, you got me. Basically, he asked Heather if she wanted to see some pictures of birds. He entices her into his place. He basically starts taking her clothes off and gets her clothes off to a certain extent. At this point, she's starting to scream, I think. He puts his hand over her face to the point that she suffocates and dies. Now, the thing that is probably troublesome to people listening to this is it takes about 90 seconds, a minute and a half, to kill somebody this way. Now he's in a bit of a panic, and he doesn't know what to do. He dumps out his hockey bag or sports bag, puts her inside the bag, carries her out. He then put her in the backseat of the vehicle and drove out. He starts driving up there. He needs gas. He pulls into the gas station. At what point he formulates the plan to buy a ticket for a movie. So he's contemplating his alibi at this time. He then drives over to Maple Ridge and ends up in the Golden Ears Park. And throws her into the wooded area, I'd say 2 or 3 miles inside the park boundary.
He'd stuffed her in a hollowed-out log that was burnt, and then he had confessed to tearing up everything that he could find to cover it and hide the body. So he used leaf litter, salmon berries, ferns, everything. He was just stripping them and throwing them into this hollowed-out log to cover the body up.
Ertmode leaves skid marks alongside the road to mark the spot, so he can return to move the body. The next morning, just as Constable Cross had suspected, Ertmode returns to the park and moves the victim a second time.
Gets her into the car and then down to the boat ramp, where he puts the bag with her still in it inside the boat, and paddles his way around. So he's out of sight of the boat launch, so nobody can see him actually throwing the bag in the water, and puts the bag in the water.
There's about 15 key points from his confession that overlap perfectly with the investigation. He explains everything as to how that plant material got there, right, and why it would be there. So it was very telling. You know, nobody's going to falsely confess to this stuff is going to be able to hit those kind of details.
Ertmode's confession explains where he hid the body before dumping it into the lake. Jeff Parks and Dr. Matthews returned to Golden Ears Park to attempt to find the spot.
If the body was hidden, it should be somewhere within walking distance of here. And I spent several hours walking through the forest, carefully looking for evidence that I could link with what I'd seen in the bag.
And he found exactly the spot. He actually found the log that stuffed her in a hollowed out log that was burnt.
Literally everything that was in the bag, except for one thing, was found right within maybe 10 meters, a small area. And it was a perfect spot, a little cavity hidden behind a log.
Dr. Matthews finds 12 of the 13 plant varieties identified in the sports bag, all in the same area at Alouette Lake.
The probability of all 12 of these botanicals existing in one little area, it's like, wow, that's like a miracle.
But Dr. Matthews still cannot place the 13th specimen.
These 2 little juniper fragments were definitely not of a native juniper, so they couldn't have come from Golden Ears Park because they don't grow there.
Is this last specimen the missing piece of evidence needed to confirm that Ertmode is the murderer? The massive search for 10-year-old Heather Thomas has ended. The missing persons case is now a homicide investigation. The shifting water levels of Alouette Lake reveal her lifeless body, 35 kilometers from her home. A vintage car is reported in the park the day after Heather's disappearance. A trace of the license plate leads RCMP to the prime suspect. Shane Ertmode lived in the same townhouse complex as the victim. He is placed under 24-hour surveillance while investigators gather evidence. After his arrest, Ertmode confesses to the murder. Dr. Matthews has spent months trying to locate the origin of the 13th plant sample found in the sports bag. Then he sees a clue in a media report.
That made me think, gosh, if somebody had taken a hockey bag and was dragging it through these bushes, that'd be a great way for little bits to sort of jump off the bush when they're brittle and dry and pop into the bag.
That's when everything clicked in place. Like, that's how the juniper got in there. That hockey bag top zipper was torn open, and that's exactly how that stuff got in the bag.
And Jeff Parks and I agreed that we did link Golden Ears Park, the bag, with the ultimate suspect.
More than 2 years after Heather's death, her murderer goes on trial. The prosecution's case is built on Shane Ertmode's confession and a lot of circumstantial evidence. Will they succeed in convincing a jury that Shane Ertmode is guilty of first-degree murder?
You are portraying a set of circumstances that makes a jury or a judge believes that there is no other possibility as to what happened, other than the circumstances and what you've laid out. So when you think of all the possible pitfalls in that, is that if one piece of the puzzle gets shaken, then the credibility of the entire puzzle falls apart.
The trial lasts 5 months. Hundreds of exhibits are shown. Dozens of testimonials are heard. On August 29, 2002, the jury retires to deliberate.
So we were fully expecting the verdict to be a day or 2 or 3 down the road. Well, it came back in hours. He was found guilty of first-degree murder. Automatic life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years.
For investigators, volunteers, and the prosecutors who work tirelessly, the verdict is bittersweet.
Here we did get together with the prosecutors, Pete, and Sergeant Cross, and Jeff Parks. We did get together. We had a dinner, and it was a strange. On one hand, you're really happy that you convict a guy, but why? The other, we're really sad.
To this day, this crown goes back to Golden Ears on the anniversary and puts out a stone monument to Heather.
Years after the fact, Alain Bouchard still thinks about one specific moment in the case.
Unfortunately, I was never able to identify the print that I found on the mirror. And to this day, it makes me a little sad.
The Crown, at the time of this, had about a 10 or 11-year-old daughter. I had a 10 or 11-year-old daughter. Both of us were single dads. It was one of these things that it's just one of these cases that stays with you. And we were hugging each other at the end, and it was just, you could just see the emotional release.
The life of an innocent girl has been stolen. But the shifting waters of Alouette Lake refuse to be an accomplice to her murder. The memory of Heather Thomas is still very much alive in the minds of the hundreds of people whose lives were touched by her tragic death.